Hi, I'm excited to be here today partnering with Courtney Krieber on her 25 Days of Christmas card series. We were asked if we wanted to participate to look at some of the cards that she made last year for her 25 Days of Christmas and pick one that we like and then use that technique together with Courtney. I'll have a link to Courtney's video in my description box below. This is the card that I made using a vellum technique. Let's get started. For my card, I have several different layers using several different types of media. This layer is the card background. I'm using Distress Oxide ink, and the colors that I've selected are Speckled Egg, Peacock Feathers, and Broken China. This is Broken China. The first color I laid down was Speckled Egg. The second color was Peacock Feathers. I'm going back in now with some Speckled Egg. And there's really not much rhyme or reason to how I laid these colors down. I'm basically just making a mosaic background featuring the three different colors, and I'm just ink blending with my ink blending brushes. I am, again, just using Broken China, Speckled Egg, and Peacock Feathers. And you can use your blending brushes for more than one color of ink pad. So for example, I'm using this larger brush on both my Peacock Feather and my Broken China. Now the smaller brush I have just for Speckled Egg. You can wash those in between uses. I'm using some Avery Sparkle Spray, Shimmer Spray. The color is clear. I've just taken the sprayer off of the bottle and I'm just basically tapping in different sections on my paper just to get sort of like a snow background. And when Courtney made her card, she used three different types of mediums on this panel. One was a shimmer spray, which she applied also just by tapping the nozzle. One was a white pigment ink and one was gouache. So I do have a white pigment ink. This is Brilliant's white pigment ink. I'm going to use my splatter box because this can get messy and I want to keep my craft mat as clean as possible. So what I'll do is grab an acrylic block and press down with my ink pad. So the ink is on the acrylic block. I'm also going to take my spritzer, which has a little bit of a silver mica shimmer to it, and I'm going to then flick this onto my panel using a paintbrush. So this is a really good way to get a lot of specks on your project pretty easily, and I do recommend using a splatter box. This is white gouache. It's just generic. Just some kind of generic thing I picked up at Michael's. I'm using my Distress sprayer to add some water to the gouache, making it thin. You want it to be thin so that you can get some good flicks going and some splats. So I'm pretty happy with how this panel turned out. It's not, perfectly ink blended, but it doesn't need to be. It's going to be a background panel behind the vellum, so you're really not going to see it, but I wanted it to look like snow. And to me, it looks like a lot of snow, possibly a blizzard. Okay, I'm going to set my panel aside to dry. I have a piece of vellum. I have a Honeybee stencil. This is the same stencil that Courtney used in her video last year. I think this one's called Snowfall. I'll have the products that I use listed in the description box below. That's one of the reasons why I picked this technique and this specific card, because I knew I had a lot of the supplies, a lot of the same supplies that Courtney had. So now I have my vellum on this piece of laminated graph paper just to protect my surface. I'm using the embossing powder bag, which is an anti-static tool that keeps your embossing powder from going in spots where you do not want it to go. All right, we're going to take our stencil and we're going to use some washi tape and we're going to tape the vellum background down on top of the stencil. I want to keep my vellum securely attached to the stencil so it doesn't slip when I'm applying the embossing ink. Otherwise, it will get kind of smeary looking when you go to emboss it. So I have some embossing ink that I'm going to use, and I'm going to push down with the embossing ink directly on top of the stencil. And I'm just using the Simon Says stamp embossing ink that I had in my stash. And I am pressing with the embossing ink directly on top of the stencil. And I do not like how this turned out in the end. You'll see what I mean once you see me go through all the steps. So I did it a different way the second time, and I'm much more happier with the second time. But I figured I would leave this in here to show you the mistakes that I made. I'm sprinkling white embossing powder over top of this vellum sheet that is embossed with snowflakes. The white embossing powder will stick to where I stamped the vellum over top of the stencil. I brought out my cutting board because this temperature that I'm using gets really hot in this heat gun, and I don't want to burn my mat. And when you heat emboss vellum, the vellum does have a tendency to warp a little bit. So you just have to be really careful. Move your heat gun a lot. Move it from place to place. Don't just hold it there like you would a piece of paper. If you do that, then you could definitely shrink it. So this is my first vellum overlay, and it's not that bad, but there were some spots where I could tell that it was basically ink smushed, and the edges of my snowflakes got a little bit distorted. Instead of being crisp and sharp, they got a little bit rounded. So I actually end up doing this panel over again, and I use a different way to apply my embossing ink. And I use a different kind of embossing ink, so I'll show you that in a minute. But first, I'm going to make my mat. So this layer is going to be peacock feathers. I wanted to pick a color that would coordinate with one of the colors that I used in my background panel, the one that I splattered with shimmer spray. Do you remember that one? So the peacock feather color, again, it might not remind somebody of Christmas. It's a non-traditional color for Christmas, but it's one of my favorite Distress Oxide colors because it's teal, and I like that color. I love purple, but I also like teal. And blending it with a brush is the easiest way for me to apply it. This is Bristol Smooth paper, so it goes down easily. I'm going to dry it with my heat gun so that it is dry when I go to apply the next layer of media, which is Gina K Glitz Glitter Gel, and it's the crystal clear. And I'm going to use the stencil that I already have used, and I'm going to put it on top of this color and apply the Glitz Glitter Gel and let that dry. And I let it dry overnight, and don't touch it. After I apply it, I don't touch it. I just set it aside and I let it air dry. So again, you just take your stencil, figure out what part of the stencil you want to be featured. Just grab your washi tape, tape it down, and you're good to go. I do have a plastic craft mat down on top of my regular craft mat because I'm trying to protect the surface of my regular craft mat. My regular craft mat, I want to keep it as clean as possible. So this is a very small container of the Glitz Glitter Gel. It's not the full-size container. It's just a small one that was part of a sample that I got in a kit that I purchased. And I'm just using a plastic spatula, which I prefer plastic spatulas because I can bend them easy compared to a metal spatula. I have arthritis in my hands, and it's hard for me to apply a lot of pressure with a rigid tool. So having one that's plastic gives me the ability to really spread it on, I think, easily, and it does a fine job besides that. But look at this Glitz glitter gel. Isn't this an amazing product? It reminds me of a sugar scrub that you would use in the shower to exfoliate. Um, it's real thick and it's real glittery. It has a lot of glitter in it and a lot of shine. It's almost iridescent. I think it is actually iridescent because holographic, maybe, just because of the way that it looks. And you don't really see too much of it on my finished card, but it's just something that makes the card have more than one layer. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, that's gorgeous. And it just makes the card have a little bit more dimension, in other words. So it's a little different than the card that Courtney made. You know, I'm not trying to copy her card exactly step by step. That's not the purpose of the video. It's just to take a technique that she used in her last year's card series and make it our own. However, that being said, my stencil is the same as hers, and my dies that I'm going to use, my word dies, are the same as hers too. So there's a lot of similarities, some differences, but this is me showing Courtney that I was inspired by her card, and it was something that I wanted to try on my own. And really, we get that through YouTube. As somebody who makes YouTube videos, I would hope too that there's people who see a card that I make and think, hey, I like that card. I wanted to give it a try. You know, that's what it's all about, learning from each other. So this is my first embossed. I didn't like it as much, that embossed vellum. It kind of looked different. It didn't look crisp and sharp. This is Razzle Dazzle VersaMark. Look at that shine, you guys. If you're not familiar with this product, and I have this on fast forward because I already did a vellum panel previously in the video and I didn't want to take up too much time. But instead of just ink smushing and pushing down with that ink pad, I grabbed a blending tool. So this is one of those domed blending foam pads that you get from scrapbook.com. And I'm using that to apply my VersaMark. And I found that by doing this, it keeps my stencil, well, it keeps the embossing ink true to the stencil. So it avoids any kind of distortion, because my snowflakes on the panel that I previously did kind of got lumpy, like for lack of a better word. I want my snowflakes to have sharp edges. I want them to look crisp. I want them to look like they look on the stencil. And this is what it looks like once you do use the VersaMark. So it looks like a wet watermark, but this Razzle Dazzle VersaMark is really special because it has a lot of shine and shimmer in it. I was half tempted to not emboss and just use it the way it is, just dry it or let it air dry or something, because it has such shimmer. But so I did a sample test. In other words, I grabbed a piece of vellum. I didn't use my anti-static tool. This is just a test. And I was just checking to make sure that it was going to turn out okay. And I think it turned out really good. Just putting my embossing powder back away. And I'll go ahead and grab my cutting board, which is what I use when I'm heat embossing so I don't burn my table or melt my craft mat. And this looks much better to me. I think it's like a world of a difference. So it might be the embossing ink. That Simon Says embossing ink may have just been too like oily or something, the way, or maybe I just pushed down too hard. But using the VersaMark and the blending tool, which I did like daubing, I just would daub it down with that. It really is probably the best thing I could have done. And I'll probably use it like this in the future. So I've got my white embossing powder. I am coating my card with that. My vellum panel with that. I got a little bit of embossing powder underneath. I'm not sure how I did that. So the next time I do this, which I am going to do this again because I really like the way this turned out, I will use the anti-static powder pillow on the front and the back, not just on the front. Because for some reason, when I dry this, whatever embossing powder was on the back of my vellum stuck. So, whatever. It's no big deal. It looks really pretty. I really like the way this turned out. I have it in fast forward because I already did this earlier in my video, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to fast forward to the end. I did put the two panels side by side so you can see the difference. This is what it looks like on top of the ink blended background. And this is the Gina K Glitz Glitter Gel matte layer that I'm going to adhere to the top of my card base. I'm using the Word Die Sentiment Die Winter from Honeybee. I think they call it Buzzwords. And it has 3 different layers. I'm only using 2. So the back layer is a shadow with stitching. The center layer is another shadow, and then the top layer is the actual word. But I didn't want to cover too many snowflakes, so I just went with the word, which is the top layer, and the shadow that is the middle layer. I'm going to pick out 2 different colors of blue cardstock, keeping with my blue card theme, and I'm going to die cut these with my Gemini Junior. Okay, fast forwarding, here are my die cuts. This is the shadow winter, which is a light blue, and this is the word winter, which is a different color blue, and I lost my dot for the top of my eye, which I always do. That's okay because it gives me a good excuse to use a gem instead. I'm using a pen that has glue in it for this word die. I find that this is the easiest way for me to get glue onto a word sentiment. This one has nice thick letters though, so it's not that hard. And I have these gems from Honeybee, and I'm going to pick out one that's light blue, which is like my birthstone from March. It's really a pretty gem, looks like aquamarine. And I'm going to adhere my glitzy, glittery Gina K Glitz Glitter Gel layer down onto a piece of card base, which is white. And this panel covers that card base completely. And just using acrylic block to give that a little bit of weight so it sticks. And here's my vellum, which is a little curled because I used heat, and I'm using art glitter glue, and I'm just putting little tiny dots all around behind the snowflakes to hide the glue. And it does a pretty good job. You really can't see the glue. And that worked out fine. I like the way this panel looks. I really love the snowflakes. And here's my word or sentiment, winter. And off camera, I found a sentiment in my stash, sort of a mini sentiment that goes under the word winter. And that sentiment says, wishing you a season of love and joy. So thanks so much for watching my video. Thank you very much to Courtney Krieber for inviting me and for having me as a collaborator with her. I've enjoyed knowing Courtney through her YouTube channel, and she's been a great help to me as I have continued to grow my YouTube channel. She is a great supporter of the craft community and people who want to start YouTube channels. She has her own Facebook group that I'm a part of called Handmade Happiness. I'll link that below in my description box so that you can check it out if you're interested in joining. Don't forget to check out Courtney's current video for 2020 using Vellum, and also I will have her video from 2019 using Vellum linked. Oh, one more thing I did, I put Winkastella on the word winter to make it nice and glittery. If you're new to my channel, I'd love it if you would subscribe. I do videos a couple times a week, and I also do lives, and I also do a lot of giveaways. So I'd be glad to have you. Thanks so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up and a comment about what you think about this card. Have a hopeful day. Bye-bye.